Chrono-Shift. Chapter 1. The invasion. The sky crackled with the sound of energy weapons as the alien ships descended upon Earth. Panic and chaos erupted as people ran for cover, their screams filling the air as the ground shook beneath them. The invasion had begun. Major John Sanders watched as the ships landed, their mechanical legs crushing buildings and infrastructure as they secured a foothold on the planet. He stood helpless, his military training useless against the advanced technology of the invaders. It was a nightmare come true, like something out of a science fiction novel. His unit had been tasked by the government to defend against the extraterrestrial threat, but they were woefully unprepared. Their weapons were no match for the advanced shielding of the alien ships, and their armor was useless against the cutting beams of their lasers. The knowledge that they were outmatched and outgunned was a bitter pill to swallow. The invaders descended from their ships, their bodies towering over the soldiers like skyscrapers. They bore no resemblance to any life form on Earth. Their twisted metal forms and glowing red eyes were an abomination. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, making short work of the troops that dared to fight back. It was like they were playing with their prey. John and his team were forced to retreat to a makeshift command center, their position slowly being overrun by the alien forces. As they huddled together, all they could do was wait for the inevitable end. But then, something unexpected happened. A group of rebels burst into the command center, led by a woman named Mara. She was a fierce warrior with a determination that burned bright in her eyes, and John found himself drawn to her strength. She had a plan, a way to fight back against the invaders, and she needed their help. John knew that if they were going to survive this, they had to follow her lead. With no other options, he and his team joined forces with the rebels, rallying together to fight back against the alien threat. As the battle raged on, John felt a new sense of hope. The odds were still against them, but with Mara's leadership and their combined efforts, they might just have a chance. The sound of their weapons echoed through the streets, a symphony of destruction that would decide the fate of the planet. But even as they fought, John couldn't ignore the nagging feeling at the back of his mind. How had the aliens found them? Why were they attacking Earth? And more importantly, how were they going to stop them? It was a battle that would test their strength and resolve, one that would define them as individuals and as a species. But in the end, only one side would emerge victorious. Chapter 2. The Time Machine. John awoke to darkness. It took him a moment to register where he was. The last thing he remembered was the battle raging on around him. What had happened? As he tried to sit up, he realized that he was lying on a cold metal surface. He fumbled around, searching for a light switch, and finally found a button that illuminated the room around him. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The walls were lined with blinking screens and strange instruments, and there was a central console in the middle of the room that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. He couldn't wrap his head around what he was seeing. As he stood up, he heard a voice behind him. "Good, you're awake. I was starting to worry." He spun around to see Mara standing there, watching him with a concerned expression. "What happened?" he asked, his mind still reeling. She motioned towards the console. "This is a time machine." John stared at her in disbelief. A time machine? He had heard of such things in movies and books, but he never thought they actually existed. Mara explained that the machine had been built by a team of scientists who had been researching ways to travel through time. When the aliens had attacked, they saw an opportunity to use the machine to travel back in time and prevent the invasion from ever happening. John was skeptical. The idea of changing the course of history like that seemed impossible, not to mention dangerous. But Mara was adamant that it was their only hope. She had seen firsthand the devastation the aliens had caused, and she was willing to do whatever it took to stop them. They spent hours poring over the controls of the time machine, trying to figure out how to make it work. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, and they had to rely on their instincts and ingenuity to try and make sense of it all. Finally, they managed to activate the machine. The room shook as the device hummed to life, and John felt a wave of vertigo wash over him. There was a bright flash of light, and then they were somewhere else. When John opened his eyes, he was standing in the middle of a verdant forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and a cool breeze blew through the trees. It was peaceful, and for a moment, he forgot all about the danger they were in. But then he heard something that brought him back to reality. In the distance, he could hear the sound of engines. Like the rumbling of an army on the march. They couldn't have gone all the way back to before the invasion, could they? Mara was already sprinting in the direction of the noise, and John followed close behind. They emerged from the tree line to see a battalion of tanks and troops, flying an unfamiliar flag. It wasn't the aliens, but it definitely wasn't Earth either. John felt a flash of panic. What had they done? Had they altered the course of history in some fundamental way? And if they had, what would be the consequences? It was a question they couldn't answer, not yet. They had to find a way back to their own time, and fast. As they huddled together, watching the strange army march past, John couldn't help but wonder what other perils lay ahead in their quest to prevent the invasion. Chapter 3. The first mission days had passed since John and Mara arrived in this unfamiliar time period. They had been keeping a low profile, staying hidden in the woods and observing the inhabitants of the strange land they found themselves in. They had managed to learn some of the language, and they had observed enough to get a basic understanding of the culture and hierarchy. It was a world not too dissimilar from their own, but different in small ways that added up to make it feel like an alien world. They both knew they needed to get back to their own time and prevent the alien invasion. But first, they needed to gather as much information as possible. They needed to learn everything they could about the aliens, their technology, and their weaknesses. For that, they needed to infiltrate the aliens' base. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. They needed to find a way back to their own time, and information was the key to doing that. They put together a plan. Mara would pose as a prisoner, captured in one of the relentless battles that the aliens waged against the unknown army that inhabited this world. John was to pose as her captor, and they would both sneak in under the guise of delivering her to the aliens. It was a risky move, and one that put both of them in danger. But it was the only way to learn about the technology that the aliens used, and how they had managed to travel through time. They made their way towards the alien base, keeping their heads down and moving under the cover of darkness. They had managed to learn the patrol patterns, and they snuck past the guards undetected. Once inside the base, Mara was taken away to be interrogated, leaving John to bide his time. He searched the area, taking note of the weapons, armor, and other technology that the aliens used. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, and he knew it could change the tide of the war if they could bring it back to their own time. As the hours ticked by, John knew he was running out of time. He had found a way to communicate with Mara, but they needed to escape before they were caught. Finally, they managed to break free, making their way back out of the base undetected. They raced back towards the woods, with the sound of alarms ringing in their ears. As they sprinted through the trees, everything became a blur. The ground beneath their feet shook as the aliens mobilized to hunt them down, and the sky was filled with the roar of their ships. With every step, John knew that they were closer to getting back to their own time. But he also knew that the aliens were right behind them, wielding technology that was centuries ahead of their own. It was a race against time, one that he couldn't afford to lose. As the trees around them exploded in a shower of fire, John and Mara pushed forward, desperate to escape the grasp of their pursuers. Chapter 4. The betrayal. John and Mara were exhausted, having narrowly escaped the clutches of the alien forces. They had made it back to their hideout in the woods, but they knew that it was only a matter of time before they were found again. As they sat catching their breath, John noticed something strange. One of their comrades, a young woman named Emily, was acting strange. She kept staring at them with a look of suspicion in her eyes, and John couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He decided to confront her, but as he approached, he heard her muttering under her breath. She was talking to someone who wasn't there. John tried to defuse the situation, but Emily lashed out, accusing him and Mara of being imposters. She claimed they had been sent by the aliens to infiltrate their group, and that they were there to betray them. Mara tried to calm her down, but Emily was hysterical. As others in their group gathered around, they found themselves under attack. Emily had raised the alarm, and they were surrounded by angry members of the group, convinced that they were traitors. John and Mara tried to reason with them, but it was useless. They were outnumbered and outmatched, and they had no choice but to surrender. They were taken away to be brought before the leaders of the group, unsure of what fate awaited them. As they were led through the city, John couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He had put his trust in Emily, believing that she was a member of their team, someone who shared their values and desires to stop the invasion. But now everything seemed uncertain, their mission in jeopardy. Finally, they were brought before the leaders of the group. They were people with whom they had worked alongside for weeks, forging a bond in the midst of danger and uncertainty. But now those bonding moments seemed like a distant memory. The leaders listened to Emily's accusations, and they seemed to be swayed by her words. They had always been wary of outsiders, and the presence of John and Mara had sowed seeds of mistrust within their ranks. But as the group prepared to execute them, something unexpected happened. A group of alien ships descended upon the city, unleashing a hailstorm of bullets and energy beams. The leaders of the group, realizing that they had been betrayed by Emily, scrambled to defend the city and stop the invasion. John and Mara seized the opportunity to escape, dodging between the chaotic battles and making their way towards the time machine. They knew that they had to make it back to their own time, back to the war zone where they could make a difference. The world around them was in chaos as the battles raged on. It was a fight for their lives, a fight for their mission, and a fight for the fate of the planet. As they stumbled into the time machine, they were battered and bruised. But they knew that they had come too far to give up now. They activated the device, and they were launched once more through time, hoping against hope that they had made the right decision in trusting each other. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and their mission was far from over. But as they hurtled through time, John and Mara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They had survived so much already, and they were determined to see their mission through to the end, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Resistance. John and Mara emerged from the time machine, blinking in the bright sunlight. They were relieved to be back in their own time, but they knew that the battle was far from over. As they stepped out of the machine, they were met with a scene of utter devastation. The once thriving city had been reduced to rubble, and the skies were filled with smoke and fire. The alien forces were entrenched, determined to finish the invasion once and for all. But there was a glimmer of hope in the form of a small resistance group. They were a ragtag bunch, made up of soldiers and civilians who had banded together to fight back against the invaders. John and Mara knew that they couldn't defeat the aliens on their own. They needed to join forces with the resistance, to combine their knowledge and skills in order to have any chance of success. Getting to the resistance was no easy feat. The city was crawling with alien patrols, and getting past them was like sneaking through a minefield. But John and Mara were determined, and they pressed on, using all of their skills and experience to avoid detection. Finally, after what felt like hours, they found themselves at the edge of the Resistance's base camp. The camp was a collection of tents and makeshift buildings, surrounded by barricades and lookout towers. Those who roamed the camp were a mix of soldiers and civilians, all sharing the same look of determination and despair. As they made their way through the camp, they were met with skepticism and suspicion. The resistance had been burned too many times before by supposed allies who turned out to be working for the aliens. But as they explained their mission and showed the information they had gathered from their time travels, they felt the tide turn in their favor. The resistance began to realize that they were on the same side, and that they needed to work together to defeat the aliens once and for all. Over the coming days, John and Mara worked closely with the resistance, sharing their knowledge and skills. They taught them about the alien weapons, and helped them to devise new tactics and strategies for battle. The battles were brutal and unrelenting, but they were making progress. With the help of the resistance, they managed to push the aliens back, inch by inch, until finally they had forced them out of the city. John and Mara knew that this was just the beginning. There were still other cities to be liberated, other battles to be won. But for the first time in a long time, they felt hopeful. The resistance had become like family to them, and they couldn't imagine leaving them behind as they went on the front lines. They made a vow to protect and fight until the aliens were defeated. As they prepared for their next mission, John and Mara stood together at the edge of the camp, watching as the sun rose over the horizon. They knew that the fight ahead of them would be tough, but they were ready. It was a fight for their world, a fight for their future. But this time, they weren't alone. They had the resistance by their side, and together, they would stop at nothing to save their planet from the alien invaders. Chapter 6. The final battle. After months of fighting, John and Mara stood at as the invasion caravan pulled into view. The invasion force was bearing down upon the resistance, bringing their full might to bear upon the final battle. The skies were filled with alien ships, and the horizon was alit with the glow of the energy weapons. The sound of battle was deafening, a symphony of destruction that seemed to go on without end. The resistance had pulled out all the stops, using every weapon and tactic they had learned in battle to try and push back the alien forces. But it was clear that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. John and Mara were at the heart of the battle, leading the resistance forces in one final push against the alien invaders. They knew that this was a fight to the death, and that the fate of the world hung in the balance. With every step, they faced unimaginable dangers. Energy beams and explosions lit up the landscape, and screams of the dying echoed across the battlefield. But they kept going, pushing forward with a determination that only those fighting for their very survival could know. Finally, they were within reach of the alien leader, a towering figure dressed in battle armor and wielding weapons that made their own technology seem primitive by comparison. John and Mara were ready, and they charged forward, leading the final assault against the alien forces. Blades crossed and guns fired, and the air was thick with the stench of smoke and burning metal. In the midst of the chaos, John and Mara found themselves face to face with the alien leader. The battle was brutal, and they drew upon every bit of skill and courage they had to strike against the enemy. The battle raged on, each side inflicting heavy casualties upon the other. But finally, John and Mara emerged victorious, sending the alien leader crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks and smoke. The aliens who witnessed their leader's death were thrown into disarray, and the battle became a rout. They retreated back to their ships and rockets, abandoning the invasion entirely. The world was saved, and the resistance stood victorious. John and Mara looked out upon the dawn, the new dawn that they had helped usher in. Despite the countless battles they had fought, they knew that there was still so much work to be done. But for now, they could bask in the afterglow of victory, knowing that they had done what was necessary to save the world from alien destruction. And as they looked out upon the rising sun, they knew that there would be more battles ahead, more foes to fight and more victories to be won. But for now, they reveled in the triumph of the final battle. They had saved the world, and they would fight for the survival of their planet until the end of their days. Chapter 7. The revelation. With the final battle behind them, John and Mara could finally catch their breath. They had lost comrades, friends, and loved ones in the brutal war for their world, but they had succeeded in saving it from alien destruction. But despite the victories they had achieved, there was still something missing, something they couldn't quite shake off. As they looked out upon the world they had fought so hard to save, they realized that they had seen too much during their journey. They knew things that no one else did, things that could change the course of history. They carried secrets with them, secrets that they couldn't keep to themselves. So, they decided to head back to the time machine, to travel back to their own time and share the knowledge they had gained with the people there. They knew that it wouldn't be easy, that they would face questions and scrutiny, but they felt a responsibility to share with others what they had learned. They made their way to the time machine, using their knowledge of the alien technology to navigate the ruins of the once great city. They were battered and bruised, and they felt the weight of the war upon them, but they pressed on. Finally, they reached the machine, and they activated it, ready to be sent back to their own time. As they hurtled through the time stream, they felt a sense of unease, realizing that they were about to enter uncharted territory. When they arrived back in their own time, they were met with confusion and disbelief. It was difficult for their peers to understand how they had been able to jump through time, so they had to convince them about the events they had witnessed. As they tried to explain what they had seen, they were met with disbelief and skepticism. But as they continued to recount their story, they noticed something strange happening. Their memories of the war seemed to be shifting, altering in small but significant ways. They realized that their journey through time had changed history, that their actions had had a ripple effect upon the world. John and Mara were shocked and amazed by this revelation. They had never expected that their journey through time would have such a profound effect upon the world as they knew it. As they looked out upon their world, they realized that they had been given a second chance, that they had been chosen to witness the future and change the course of history. The revelation filled them with a sense of purpose, and they knew that they had more work to do. They would continue to fight for the survival of their planet, to spread the knowledge they had gained, and to ensure that the world they had saved would thrive. Their journey may be over, but the fight for the future of their world still raged on. And as they looked out upon the new dawn, they felt ready to face whatever lay ahead.